Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, brought to you by spiritualteachers.org. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, and welcome as well to a new decade. 2020 is here, and I have a big announcement to share. There's good and surprising news to report regarding the TAT Foundation's new home. As you might know, over 2 years ago, TAT purchased what we call the Thomas Green property in Roxborough, North Carolina. Now, building a retreat center from the ground up proved to be quite a challenge, but with some new determination to make this work, the project recently stirred to life. What happened next was, unexpected to say the least. Through a lot of creative thinking, individual commitments from people like yourself, hustle, and a bit of luck as well, in early December, TAT closed on a separate 15-acre property that has a large home that's suitable for meetings. The Thomas Green property that we previously purchased will be sold as soon as possible. Now, here's some details on this new property. It's in Hurdle Mills, North Carolina, which, I've never heard of that before, but it turns out it's only 35 minutes from Chapel Hill. It's situated on a 15-acre site, so one parcel is 10 acres, and then there's a separate 5-acre parcel where another building could be built in the future. It has a 5-bedroom, 5-bath home, and there's a third floor, which we plan on converting into sleeping areas. And then there's a large garage, which we're going to convert into the main meeting space. Now, another piece of this that's really exciting is that Bob Ferguson has agreed to be our teacher in residence. And we also have another person who's agreed to serve as caretaker for the property. Now, this has been a years-long effort. This really started back in 2013 with just some discussions about, could we do this? Could we pull this off? TAT hadn't been meeting at a regular location for some years since losing its lease on Richard Rose's original property. And this whole process, it recalled to mind a quote which used to hang in the family room of Richard Rose's home. And it's one that really stuck with me, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's about commitment. And it says, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance which no man could have dreamed would have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. And I think that this whole process, this project of TAT looking for and finding a new home, is really an illustration of commitment. So TAT will be holding its April 2020 meeting at this new property. But in order to do that, it's going to require a collective effort once again, because there's some immediate needs. For one, there's no tables and chairs. It's just a big empty house. So we're going to need some donations, some help from people like yourself, just to get the space set up in order to have meetings. There's also a need for a parking area on the property, so there's some trees that will need to be cleared and some gravel poured in order to create a parking lot. And then there are some upgrades needed for the water system. Like I said, it's a 5-bathroom home, but when we have meetings there, we have up to 70 people who come to these meetings, and so we need a little more water pressure, and there's some upgrades that will be needed to the system for that. So I'm asking you to help out with this project. I know many of you have done that before and have contributed anywhere from $5, $10, $100, $200, just whatever you felt inspired to do. And I'm asking again for help with this project. I'm just really excited about it, and really excited. I plan to be at the April 2020 meeting, and I can't wait to see the space. So, to help out, please go to tatfoundation.org. And if you go to the menu at the top of the page, you'll see an About. And you hit the drop down, and there's a homing ground page. So that's one way to navigate to that, to make a donation. There's a PayPal button there. You can also go directly to tatfoundation.org/tat-home. That will also get you to that donation page. So please help out in whatever way that you feel inspired to do. You could even mail a check if you want to do this the old-fashioned way. Make that out to Tat Foundation and mail to Tat Foundation, P.O. Box 873, Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania 17055. That's P.O. Box 873, Mechanicsburg, PA 17055. I appreciate any help that you can give. I've already made a donation myself, and with just a little bit from a lot of people, a lot can be accomplished. So please keep that in mind. Now for this month's episode of the podcast, it's about Joseph Sadony, who early on in my spiritual path was very influential in terms of helping me understand what intuition was and ways to explore the intuition. He was really inspiring to me, and his book, Gates to the Mind, gave me a palpable feeling for something which I previously had no experience with. Now, I couldn't have Joseph Sadony on the show because he died in the early 60s, but we do have Dr. Richard Howlin as the guest, and he is a clinical developmental psychologist who specializes in autism, who also happens to have a fascination with Joseph Sadony and has done quite a bit of research into him and his life. So please welcome Dr. Howlin and the subject of Joseph Sadony. Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate being here with you today, and I'm happy that you're willing to talk about Joseph Sadony with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Sure. Well, just to get us started, I'm fairly familiar with Joseph Sadony and was fascinated by him, but probably a lot of the people who are listening to this won't even know the name or recognize the name. Could you tell us a little bit about Sadony and perhaps how you got interested in him?
Yes, certainly. Well, he was born in Germany in 1887, just to give that piece to the story. Emigrated to the United States with his family around 1897. So he's about the age of 10 when he emigrated to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then moved on to Chicago for a while with his family, and eventually ended up in White Lake, which is where I am now, about a mile from his Valley of the Pines, which is his self-named house that he started so long ago, and it's still standing today over there. And he was why he's a man of interest is that he was really a remarkable individual. He was a philosopher, author, he was an inventor, counselor, community leader here, which is, I think, quite interesting. And not least, of course, an intuitive. So this, when I first came to this area, White Lake, Michigan, because my wife and I have a place here, someone said there was this a local gent actually came up to me and said there's this local legend, a psychologist apparently, who lived across the lake. So I began researching into Sadony and quickly discovered what a brilliant and outstanding person he was. And then I quickly, as one does, stumbled into the fact that he had extrasensory abilities. And reading his autobiographical notes, I was really struck by one account from his early childhood of a premonition he had in Germany. And that really sort of, in a sense, got me started with Sadony. I found him absolutely fascinating from that point onwards.
Yes. Are you referring to the book Gates of the Mind?
Yes. And the particular premonition he had of his brother, Herman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the first book that I read by Sadony, and the same thing. I was just captivated by his mix of the personal stories and his clues. At least I see them as clues for how could someone else develop or reveal the abilities like Sadony has.
Yeah, I was in a similar way. I was captivated by it, and that story about the brother. What came out there was just his compassion and how you immediately felt a connection with the man writing this, and the pain he suffered in losing his brother, but also the beauty of that family came through in that little account there. And I just was, as I say, I just felt such a sort of kindred connection to the man. And this sparked my interest particularly. I was not expecting to actually have any, real long-standing interest in this individual. It was purely curiosity at first. But when I found out about his premonitions, it sparked my interest because a year earlier I had encountered a client who experienced similar abilities. And I was confronted with this experience with this client that could not be explained in any way in the textbooks of my neuropsychology. So I guess that experience never really left me. And when I started reading Sadony, it was sort of making more sense to me. So that's really what started the whole thing going for me.
Mm-hmm. And you have a PhD, yes? And what's your area of specialty?
I am a clinical developmental psychologist, which is basically I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work in the area of autism, and I work with autistic clients from womb to tomb, so all through the cycle of life, and it's been a very interesting journey.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine any number of other clinical psychologists who might have been presented with a patient such as you described, and who would find some explanation for it, or dismiss it, or discount it. Why didn't you?
I've always had, when someone is sitting opposite me or in any situation, and they relate and something happens, or there's a story, or I am always captivated in some degree. I believe people. I just have an inherent faith in people, and of course with discernment, you can tell when someone is telling you a truth. And this was clear in my journey through life, that I met people who had such paranormal experiences. And this particular man, I actually experienced his paranormal ability. So It's, and I think to go back to your sort of remark there, that most, in a causal mechanistic world, you just move on. You don't, you say that's weird, and you you leave the situation and never think about it again. But I can't do that. It was just too hard. And this chap really put it right in my face, because, as I said, I actually firsthand experienced his ability, and that you have to be pretty myopic to sort of. It's not easy to move on when you have something like that happen to you.
Mm-hmm. And prior to that, had you had any other experiences in that vein?
No, I growing up in London, there's more talk of paranormal experience in England than I've noticed in the United States. Just in general parlance, you hear about mediums. I grew up hearing about these people, and it just was somehow I felt more acceptable, and so hence it was part of my development in a way. And then I studied William Blake, who was from London, and how if you study William Blake, who I think is a remarkable visionary, and these kinds of people were around me as a student, and so I was certainly open to things such as this.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we have a limit on our time today, so I'm just going to jump right into the question in my heart, which is, have you in some way practiced or deciphered those clues that Joseph Sadony left in his book for improving one's intuition? And can you share anything along those lines?
Well, reading Sadony and sort of, in a way, when you read Sadony, it's like experiencing Sadony. I think that what I have done is I really directly became more conscious of the possibilities when you're sitting across from someone, whether it's in a casual situation or in psychotherapy. It's the possibilities. I'm trained as we all are in psychology these days, in a very limited causal mechanistic, of course, going back to Newton, really. And this really does leave a mark on you, just like this culture does in this way. You find yourself, your identity as a professional, as a psychologist, is very much linked with doing things the right way, and that's how you become accepted, that's how you get your license. And reading Sadony, I deliberately then sort of went in a direction where I opened up to other possibilities that were non-verbal. So, for example, I would sit with people, and in days gone by as a younger psychologist, I would it was all about language, and it was all about finding solutions. And what I started doing more was realizing that there's so much going on without language, and some of this you could say is quite mystical, how then change evolves. And of course what this is, if you wanted to reduce it to biology, is my opinion, the right hemisphere of the brain. If we leave the dominance of the left hemisphere, which is actually driving us off a cliff right now, in my opinion, if you leave that and open up to the non-verbal dimension, which took me a long while to do, I found I'm much more effective. My work has become much more meaningful. And so that was a direct result of experiencing Sadony. that I realized, as he would put it, I think the other messages, other signals, and they were formed in him, as he says, then, and he would make images, pictures. Well, these are all aspects of the right hemisphere. And so being so dominated by language and doing and the to-do list of life, as it were, I think I'd put that away from out of sight for a while. So this is what I've been doing. I've been exploring all these different kinds of experiences and possibilities that are not within the context of typical psychotherapy, and certainly not contemporary psychotherapy, which, as you probably know, is about behavior and changing people's cognitions in a quite behavioristic way. So that's one of the most important, I think, things that have affected me in my work directly, and I think I'm a better psychologist for it, actually.
And how have you approached moving away from the reliance on the verbal aspect? Because I'm thinking of some people who will tell me that my mind is just a flurry of thought day and night, and it never stops. The dialogue never stops. Have you had to practice some techniques or methods? Or
oh yes, I the old the sort of, firstly, I actually work with clients of all ages on meditation and the idea of observing thoughts and the idea of a stream of thoughts that's going, as you say, 24/7, and shifting out of that and being able to just sit for periods with someone in that kind of space. Eckhart Tolle, the teacher, writes beautifully about how to, the here and the now, and how to do that and how to achieve that. So that's been one very important piece of that. Moving away from this constant, mind, thought obsession that this world has become more and more. What be the word? I don't know. Sort of swamped in, really, with the social media, and it's very hard for people to do. And with autism, it is, in high functioning autism, it's very similar too. They are full of words and ideas. It's something that we all share, and stepping out of that, I deliberately spend at least 15 minutes in every session in a sense being non-verbal and helping people to get that experience, because once you get the experience of space, then you get it, things change. And so this has been all this sort of opening that I've been doing as a result, of these last really 10 years of my life now.
Mm-hmm. I was curious if you felt that people on the autistic spectrum, if they had perhaps more intuitive ability, or if this was easier for them, or I think I heard you say they're just like anybody else in that respect.
Yeah, well, I get asked that question a lot, actually, and it's a good question, but I don't think so. I don't think there is any particular link with autism and paranormal experiences. And there's been this one individual I spoke of, and there was another person too, and I saw them both, even though they were diagnosed with high-functioning autism, I saw them both as just people who had this exceptional gift as well, and happened to have autistic features.
One piece of Sadony's work that's always fascinated me is he goes to some length in the Gates of the Mind book to try to distinguish between a false feeling and a true feeling. Do you have thoughts or perhaps clues that you could pass on to people about your experience with that?
Oh gosh, I wish I could. I also, of course, I've read that, and and it's something, I think, a part of the intuitive mind, that they are able to do that. I can't even imagine, because I'm not particularly intuitive. My wife is, but I'm not. But I think it's, again, a non-verbal. He talks about, as you know, Sean, this feelings he gets. He described it as, and I borrow a term actually from the psychologist Eugene Gendling and describe what he's saying as a felt sense, because that eliminates the confusion inherent in the word feeling, because feelings can be so it's a felt sense that seems to be what occurs to Sadony quite spontaneously. And then he pictures, as he puts it, form from this raw felt sense, and how he how he distinguishes that from. I think my understanding is that felt sense is, he knows at the moment it occurs, it's real. I believe it's that he's got something that's coming in, as it were, on the human radio. And he then goes with it. So I think my sense is that these people, like Sadony, and certainly that was true of my patient, knew when it was real and went with it. And how someone like myself could do that, I have no idea. I mean, we all get hunches. We all get these, moments of, where we experience coincidences and things like that can't be really coincidences. And, so it's the one thing, as you know, probably, Sadony's, one of his main hypotheses was that every individual has this ability. Right. Okay. And I fundamentally agree with that, actually. But I also, realize that there are people who, like Sadony, who is, in a sense, if this were music, we'd be talking about Mozart, that he has such an intense gift in this particular area that, I think most of us, I don't know, but I think many of us just couldn't get to a position where we would be able to distinguish a right signal from a wrong signal, or etc., or an image, or a gut feeling from something that's not authentic, etc. That's beyond me, how one could do that.
Since you work with children some, do you think, or have you experienced that children are better able to develop this access to the right side of their brain?
I think so. I think this is a real cultural number that's been done for 300 years. We've been emphasizing, of course, in a sense unconsciously, the left hemisphere, and at the expense of the right hemisphere. So what we've lost is integration. And I think I said once at a talk a few weeks ago that if you took a child and for about half an hour every day, instead of reading a story, which they do all the time, is give them work on kinds of work of an intuitive nature, that I'm sure these children, this would change their development, change their brain, and create much more integration. But of course, this is not currency these days in the schools, and that's I think sad to see that more and more. We're becoming obsessed with language to the point that language is becoming almost devoid of meaning in many ways. If you know what I mean, it's everywhere, and as soon as you lose that link to reality from language, the visceral reality, which is of course the right hemisphere, then it's just words and all of these crazy things you see on the internet and social media. It's lost its basis. So I think there's really a place for bringing back intuitive kinds of exercises for young children. And I do experience generally children to be more intuitive, especially very young children. I notice that they pick up on so much now as you watch them and see how they're responding. They kind of and it depends, of course, some children are more that way, but I've noticed there's certain children who can really, they've got your number, as they say. It could be a 3-year-old even, that they look at you and they've basically figured you out, which happens quite a bit, and it's wonderful to observe it. It's a bit daunting, but they have this sort of sense of this deeper sense of meaning and intuition. And of course, I'm also was trained in Jungian psychology, so I'm aware of the typologies and the intuitives and these variations. So certainly there are many children who have this intuitive ability in this way.
I wanted you mentioned that you gave a talk last week, I believe you said, or a few weeks ago, and I noticed that one of your talks that I saw online was called Exploring the Boundaries of Perception. I was curious, in giving these talks, what are you hoping to accomplish?
Well, when I do them, really the first thing is quite, I don't know, maybe very straightforward. To keep this individual, to place him in some kind of position where people recognize his talent. I mean, people here in White Lake know about him, but even in this area, most people do not know of the depth of what his talents were, and how much he did, and what a brilliant mind he had. It's so, it's profound. And so one of the straightforward goals is for me is to get, so to speak, more awareness about Joseph Sadony in the community around here, around this area on Lake Michigan, and then even further afield. So we've got a local historical society, and now we're talking about having a special area of the library and bringing all the artifacts in. There's so much of his material around this area that people actually own, and unfortunately, what's happened, I'm not sure how much you're aware of this, Sean, but he wrote many different small things,
right?
Small little books and papers, and that's created a bit of a problem because they're sort of strewn across this greater Muskegon area, and so it's really hard to get a sense of what he did in his life, because there's all these very diverse manuscripts around, and some of them are in the libraries. So to pull this all together and really get a testimony to this very amazing individual. So that's the first thing, I think, is that very straightforward, and we're going ahead with that here in the local historical society, that hopefully we can pull that off. The other thing is I just like, I find the story, I find this aspect of psychology fascinating. This parapsychological reality, and what Sadony created in me, sort of got moving in me, was a desire to find more out about the boundaries of perception. And of course, through this, I was turned on to Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance theory, etc., etc. So I'm always excited. I love teaching. I taught at a university for a long time, and I love teaching. So it's exciting to share with people these kinds of, sort of, in a way, expanding the reality of what we do every day. Because I find when I say things about, for example, the fact that my family have had paranormal experiences, I noticed in the United States, people look at me very strangely. And it struck me. So part of this is also showing people that there are many more aspects to this journey than they probably have thought about. And there are people out there who have actually these abilities. They're not just unique to Joseph Sadony. And so part of it is that too, sharing with people this other world, really. If you think about it, which I urge people to do in the talks, is when I share with them the premonition that Sadony had as a young boy about his brother, I said, stop and think about what this means. It means that he was aware of something that hadn't yet happened. So really that turns, our Newtonian world on its head, our causal mechanistic society on its head, and points to another dimension beyond time and space. And that's just absolutely fascinating for me. And to think about that and what that might mean, and to share that with people and get their feedback on it is really an absolute joy for me, because I think it's an amazing story.
Mm-hmm. Can all of this, can the parapsychological be explained in a mechanistic way, which I almost feel like sometimes Sadony spends a good bit of Gates of the Mind saying things like, well, there is no such thing as the paranormal. This is just normal. All of us can do this. Given that, do you personally feel like there's something more to us than a body and a mind and chemicals and so forth? Is there something other than the physical?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And all of what we've been talking about, for me personally, attests to this, that there's much more. I mean, I'm a Christian. Sadony was a devout Christian. And so if you're a Christian, you live in a supernatural world. There are other dimensions here. And I have always been just convinced of that, just accepted that reality. And so these aspects, for example, premonitions and such, of course, they go way back in human history, that they point to that other dimension in a way. They point to, for me, the idea that, if you will, little messages or pieces of higher wisdom, of another reality, a separate reality perhaps. And I don't think, that typically, certainly in psychology, we've come to terms with that. Certainly not in psychology. There is a department at the University of Freiburg, Germany, of parapsychology. And so that was interesting. But I think generally in psychology, we've become very increasingly reductionistic in how we view people and this kind of thing. And hence, we're losing a lot of potential here and a lot of aspects of our humanity, because I think this is a very important aspect of who we are, that they're experiences. And the more you talk about these experiences, the more you become aware of them. As I said, my wife is very intuitive, and sometimes it's freaky, but when I talk with people, and I do this when I give a talk on this subject, ask people to raise hands, and usually about 75% of the hands go up who've had these kinds of experiences. And I think there's still an aspect of embarrassment here about that. So I think once we sort of communicate and get with each other, and be honest and open, then there's going to be more and more of a dialogue, like in terms of what, of course, you do in your work, that we're it's not just a select few people who are into this. I think it needs to be brought into the broader world, that there are other, if you will, another reality or other realities there that we can move into, and it just makes it makes me much more respectful of the limitations of my abilities as a psychologist or whatever. It makes the mystery of a human being much more apparent, because that's what it is. I mean, if I'm sitting opposite someone, it doesn't matter whether they have autism or something else. It's an absolute mystery what's going on between us. And I don't pretend for a second that I've got full clarity of any of this. And that's, as going back to what I said earlier, that's what Sadony has opened for me a bit more, where I'm able to tolerate that now more, and leave the old professional role, so to speak, and actually come into a session and leave a session feeling much more connected to the world, which I never did in previous years.
And at the same time, it sounds like you would say that your ability in your profession has improved or changed, or there's a new dimension in terms of your ability to help people because of this.
Absolutely. I feel, as I said, I've become a better psychologist, a true, if you will, counselor. I've been able to cast away all the kinds of, shackles, as Blake would say, the mind-forged manacles of the role. And I would think I'm also very at home in the left hemisphere. So I realize, I'm very clear about planning and the need for this, and certainly working with different kinds of problems and issues of daily living. There needs to be some good left hemispheric techniques used to get people to manage situations more. Absolutely. But there's this other area of course, the problem is, how do you get that across to someone? It's rare that you get someone coming in to see a psychologist who you just say, well, this is what you need to do, and they go out and do it. No, there's usually a lot of complex reasons going on, or that they can't do it. And this is where true counseling comes in, true psychology comes in, because you that's where you go into the real relational aspect, some of which is non-verbal, and you provide more time, more space, and things, in a sense, become more spacious, if you will, which doesn't fit managed care very well. 6 sessions and you're done, and but even if I have fewer clients for that reasons, because the insurances won't pay anything like that, the ones I see, I feel, this is what we need to do. We need to spend more time. We need to take more space and move it, so that then actually you achieve the goals that were there originally. But it has to come, in my opinion, through this openness and spaciousness of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you're a Christian. Has your experience with Sadony's work and your own unfolding of your intuition, have you found that has given you any insight into, I don't know how you want to phrase it, into your faith, or into the presence of grace in your life, or any actual visceral feeling of what is God?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think one thing I've always felt about Sadony, and I'm sensing, Sean, that you felt this when you read him, that he's an extremely compassionate individual. I mean, a very, person who really cares. I just always have felt that. And that in me has always, I never felt really I've struggled with my own issues over the years from early childhood, actually, severe depression all through my life. And for that reason, I never felt what other people seem to feel going to Mass. It did, because I was really, wounded. And so I didn't have this kind of open, natural relationship to faith. But the one thing that kept me was that realizing that I see God in people, and I'm always drawn to people, and seeing that reflection in people, and the goodness, and that has always been my foundation in my faith, really, and I think that's certainly, obviously reinforced by Christ's teachings, and in Sadony I felt that was very much a part of him. And some of the stories you pick up, I mean, people come to me sometimes in the area. And in fact, at the last talk, I was packing up, and of course people come and talk. And this quite, very older gentleman came up to me. He had a walker, and he said, you could see he was struggling in some way. I mean, I didn't know what was going on, whether he had Parkinson's. I didn't realize it, but I just, waited and said, yeah, he said, and he spoke, and he said, my father knew Joseph Sadony. I said, well, that's wonderful, and he's shaking now at this point, and I realized he was choking up, he was crying. And I put my arm around him. I said, it's okay, yeah, just take your time. And he told me that he lived Joseph Sadony, and we're all right on Lake Michigan here. So he lived, this gentleman with his family, a few houses down on Lake Michigan, just near Joseph Sadony, and his father apparently knew him. And that his family, the gentleman told me, had, when he was a young boy, had a horrible thing happen. They lost their house and their property. There was some apparent title feud, and they lost. It went to the Michigan Supreme Court, apparently, he told me. And, of course, they were devastated, the family. Anyway, about a week later, Joseph Sadony appears at the door. And I don't know if that was the first time, that's when he met this gentleman's father. It may have been. And he said, hi, I heard about your loss. And basically what he said, and the family are all sort of like just in mayhem here, this is their family home. And he said, but realize there are losses and losses in life. And he said, that family who have now own your property, they will experience a worse loss soon. So just realize this is how life is sometimes. And 2 weeks later, the mother, the woman, actually, in the case of the family, died. And so I think, and then he said, the old gentleman said, and then Sadony went up to me and had a stone in his hand. He grabbed my hand and he said, you hold on to this and you focus on what you want to do and you will achieve it. And looked him squarely in the eyes. And I think, when you hear stories like that, the humanity of this man and is what, it comes out very strong for me. So I feel, a kindred spirit in that way to him. And I have a beautiful photograph, I don't know if you've seen it, Sean, where he's sitting at a desk writing, and it's like there's a hedge there behind him, or something like greenery, and there's a beautiful crucifix there. And that's my favorite image, because I think he was very much a very deeply compassionate man, and one who wasn't in his high towers at the Valley of the Pines, it was a part of the community, served in various offices around the community. So he was really, a solid human being and a very compassionate one. So that's part of, really a part of my connection to him too, and that's how that's how my faith and my belief has developed. Through the compassion aspect of my own life and of people. That was always there, even through my worst moments, and that's become more. I've become more conscious of that now, and Sadony has reinforced that in me even more. So that's been a beautiful development.
You mentioned that there were manuscripts and pamphlets and so forth scattered all around the area. Other than Gates of the Mind, do you have a favorite piece of writing by Sadony?
I have he would self-publish right up there in the Valley of the Pines. He had a printing press, and he made. I have several. He wrote for the Muskegon Chronicle, which is the city near here, in a newspaper, and I have several editions. He also published a newsletter of such called the Whisperer, and it was really him. You'd love to see this stuff. It's really him just talking about life and what was going on at the time. It was the Second World War or whatever. And so those are I cherish those, but I also have another original it's a little book called The Human Radio. And in that little book, and I was expecting him to elaborate on his, scientific efforts to try and find a theory about, what he was experiencing, which is what he was often trying to do. But what he does is he talks a bit about the theory and what he thinks is happening, but then goes into talk about and in detail list all the different premonitions he's had. And that is particularly fascinating for me and one of my favorites, because he's trying to, I sense, saying, look, this is real. And of course, many of his premonitions in this area, of course, were validated by witnesses. There's some quite striking ones. And so, but you sense, I think Joseph Sadony inevitably suffered a bit from isolation as not being a typical academic, so to speak. And thus, I think he was often trying to, show people what he actually does and how he does it. And this is what this little book is about. And it's fascinating. It's one of my favorites to read, because of the different kinds of premonitions he would have and how he would warn people, etc., from different things and what happened then. And it's quite remarkable to read, even as small as it is.
I used to... I probably came across Gates of the Mind almost 25 years ago, maybe, and I used to fantasize about someday I'll make a pilgrimage to the Valley of the Pines, and there I will find hidden in the file cabinets the answers which Joseph Sadony alludes to seeking in Gates of the Mind. Can you disavow me of that fantasy now? Have you been to?
Yes, okay. I can. It's time to move on. Yeah, the valley, this will maybe help you. The Valley of the Pines, unfortunately, has fallen into disrepair. Different reasons. It hasn't been really looked after. And one of this historical society here is trying to, change that. And, but yes, it's still standing, and it was, in its time, an amazing place. It was what he had built there, all with his own bare hands, I might add. An amazing place where he printed, had his laboratory, and would receive people from as far as Hollywood who'd come in for counselling or, to see him. So he, and there's so many sides to this man. He worked for President Roosevelt in visiting Indian reservations. He's just remarkable, a true maverick. So I'd love to think that there was some sort of, because this is the very point we were mentioning earlier, that there's all these pieces strewn everywhere, because he didn't write a series of books as such. And again, everything he did was self-published. So they unfortunately have been scattered around this area. And, and this is what we're trying to do, is to get these together to find some kind of, order and direction in the different areas he would be researching. I found quite a lot of experimental evidence at the library in Muskegon of equations and quite adept physics mapped out, where he was trying to measure signals as thoughts, etc., going into that whole area of research. But again, they're fragments, sadly, and we hope to bring them more together, and so that, maybe even publish something.
Oh, that's fascinating. You're actually the first person who has ever mentioned something like that, his actual lab notes, let's say. Yeah,
he worked up there, and he had someone working with him, I believe, a chemist or something, and they were really, he was really trying to put it all together, and so my plan is to go back to the library again soon and try to somehow catalogue and get an idea of how to catalogue what's there in the library, and then bring that back to White Lake.
Well, I know we're getting close to that hour mark. I did want to ask you, perhaps as a bit of an aside, if I happen to be a film buff. I love movies. Are there any particular films that you feel that touch upon these ideas or might inspire someone to explore the intuition more?
Gosh, I can't really. I mean, in intuition, I'm moved. I suppose the closest I can describe is films from certain directors who are purely visual.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think necessarily, for example, for me, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a sort of a religious movie, and the visual aspects of it are just mesmerizing. They were when I first saw it as a boy, and they still are. And Kubrick was an absolute visual animal. I mean, it was pure. So it's those kinds of things where the visual is so intense, and I can forget any necessary plot, or it doesn't really even matter at that moment. You just see this body floating out into space, and the pure loneliness of void, and et cetera, et cetera. But as in terms of intuition, no, not films. My greatest, I mean, I love films. I'm a big film fan, especially the great days of Hollywood and the great directors, etc. But my films, what I love in terms of like what we're talking about is films that show humanity and compassion. And my favorite one is an old film called Random Harvest with Greer Garson, and that is a film that just is so beautifully human, and that shows that compassionate aspect of humanity that I just love films like that. They're just healing, and when you watch them, they just make you feel, really about what we're about and what we should be about as human beings.
Oh.
But yeah, that's it.
Thank you for that. I haven't heard of that. I appreciate that.
Oh, Random Harvest. Oh, it's a beautiful movie. Yeah, check it out.
Okay. And how about, other than Sadony's books and pamphlets, any books along these lines that you recommend?
Well, I think in general, I think one of the most beautiful books I think I've read in this general aspect of what we're talking about. I mean, it's not directly about intuition, but of course intuition weaves its way through the fabric of the book, is Care of the Soul by Thomas More.
Mm-hmm.
That is a. Have you heard of that one?
I have heard of it, but I have not read it.
Oh boy, it's a beauty. I read it when I was younger, as a young psychologist. In fact, when I first came to the United States, and I thought it was good. But I happened to pick it up about 2-3 years ago again and reread it, and it's absolutely a beautiful book. It is a truly wonderful work. So that is, in terms of, and he has a Jungian perspective, and Jung was an intuitive. And so this whole, what I was talking about my development as a psychologist is exactly what he's talking about really through that book. And it was just, it's just a real treasure. Yeah, Care of the Soul.
Got it. Well, if people were interested in contacting you or finding more about you, where would they go?
Well, you can go to I have a website which is more directed at autism, but all my information is on there, and whatever talks I might be giving, and that's richardhowlin.com.
Got it. Okay, and I'll be sure I'll have some notes from this podcast on my site. I'll be sure and link to your site as well from that.
Sure.
Well, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Are there any last thoughts that you have or recommendations that you would make to people who are curious about Sadony and would like to explore this more?
Well, I think is the again, unfortunately, it's so strewn, but I think a good direction to go to find out more. There's a website, and if they Google Joseph Sadony, they will find this website, and it has a lot of the writings on the website. So that would be my first. I don't have the exact address, but if you Google Joseph Sadony, this website will come up. And it's done by apparently the family. It's kind of strange because it's there's no identification of who it is who's writing the website, but it's very well done, and it's got photographs, and it's got and if you like, I could send you a link when I get off.
That'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. That would be the best place to start. And then any other questions, like about what we have here at the White Lake Library, to contact the White Lake Library and see what they have on file here. And maybe you can get copies of this, etc. But as I say, it's a work in progress there, and we want to build this up and get some kind of catalogue, so that we can sort of put together the pieces of this man, which is quite a challenge because, as I said, he was good at so many things. Brilliant mind, absolutely brilliant mind, and someone you have to realize who, at a very early age, had no use for school, and he had this self-assuredness that was truly remarkable. He knew who he was, and he knew what he needed to learn, and never had any higher education, and yet he writes English beautifully, even though he was in the German language for the first 10 years or so of his life, which is truly a remarkable achievement. And he's altogether an amazing man. I would love to sit down with him. It's one of my, you have that dream of finding your book, Sean. Right. I have the dream of sitting down with a bottle of scotch with Joseph Sadony. And the first thing I do, I'd ask about his childhood. Right. What that must have been like, to have your friends, your mates, do that again, Joe. How do you know that? I don't. I just know it. I don't know.
Right.
That must have been absolutely amazing.
Well, perhaps someday you'll have the experience like Sadony had with his brother who had passed away, and you'll find yourself walking out in nature somewhere, and Sadony will be at your side.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, I do feel, I feel a sort of a kind of a obligation here, to do more of this, and also the kind of importance of being respectful towards him, and just sort of trying to do the best job I can in what I do with this, and I tell you, the people are very, very interested in this man, and they should be.
Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate all that you're doing to help people learn about Sadony and help keep his memory alive.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to be able to spend time with you. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. For more information about today's guest, as well as more interviews, books, and other resources, go to spiritualteachers.org. That's spiritualteachers.org.